Well, thank you all for joining us today. This is one of the CANON webinars, the Canadian Anonymization Network. We are a professional not-for-profit association that is set up to promote good practices for the anonymization of information to enable responsible data sharing. And we've been organizing events throughout the year related to anonymization. This is actually the second event that we organize with the Singapore PDPC. We did one a couple of years ago on anonymization, and this year we're doing having one today on synthetic data. But let me start off with some logistics. So the plan for today is the session will last for 1 hour. The first 30 minutes or so will be a presentation, and then the last 30 minutes or so will be a moderated discussion where I will moderate the questions, and of course the attendees can also ask questions. My name is Kal Dilamam. I'm one of the co-directors of CANON. Forgot to introduce myself. And our speaker today will be Vivian Shah. Vivian is a senior manager of data innovation and protection at a group policy and technology at the Personal Data Protection Commission of Infocom Media Development Authority at the IMDA in Singapore. In her role with the PDPC, she assists with information and communication technology system reviews for enforcement of the Personal Data Protection Act, as well as developing technology guidance for organizations to facilitate compliance with the PDPA. The reason we organized this webinar was the PDPC had published a guidance or proposed guidance document for synthetic data generation, PDPC is one of the first regulators in the world to develop guidance specifically. I think the first regulator in the world to develop guidance specifically around synthetic data generation. So the objective for today is for Vivian to present the guidance, the rationale behind it, experiences with it thus far, and then future directions where PDPC thinks this is headed. For the attendees, should be a Q&A button on your screen. So please put your questions there at any time, and then once we get to the Q&A part and the discussion part, I'll go through the questions that have been posed, and then Vivian will respond to those questions. Vivian is also joined by two of her colleagues, and I will let her introduce them. They will help answer the questions after the formal presentation is finished. So with that, I will pass it on to Vivian to let you start the presentation. Thank you very much for joining us. I know it's quite late for you, so I really appreciate you taking the time to participate in this webinar.
No problem. Thank you, Dr. Khalid, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. As Dr. Khalid is introduced, I'm Vivian from Personal Data Protection Commission, or PDPC. I'm joined today by my colleagues Ming Chen and Wing Cheong from the Agency for Science, Technology and Research, better known as A*STAR. First of all, I sincerely want to thank Dr. Khalid again for inviting PDPC to participate in the CANON webinar. We are very honored and privileged. And today we are very excited to share our guide on synthetic data generation with all of you. Let's go for the next slide. Okay, before we dive in, allow me to provide some context about PDPC and our role. PDPC is an integral part of the Infocom Media Development Authority, or IMDA, in Singapore. As a statutory board of the Singapore government, IMDA spearheads the development and regulation of the Infocom and media sectors, driving Singapore's digital transformation. Our mission at PDPC is twofold. We aim to support data protection while fostering innovation. This dual focus helps build public confidence in how personal data is handled within the private sector. Let's now move on to the main topic of my presentation today. So let's go to the next slide. So in Singapore, we recognize that many organizations seek to leverage data from their business partners to make more informed decisions, strengthen customer and partner relationships, and improve their business operations. One way in which they can do so responsibly and safely would be through use of privacy-enhancing technologies or PETs. PETs comprise a suite of tools and technologies that enable the processing, analysis, and extraction of insights from data without exposing the underlying personal or commercially sensitive data. In 2022, PDPC published our guide to basic anonymization aimed at promoting anonymization techniques for data sharing among SMEs. Since then, we've been actively promoting for the use of anonymization to regulators in ASEAN and Asia Pacific region. We are also collaborating with ASEAN and APA members on joint guidance on anonymization to support their respective industries. In recent years, we've observed a growing interest in synthetic data, particularly in driving the advancement of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Responding to this trend, PDPC launched our guide on synthetic data generation this year. This guide aims to help business to better understand synthetic data and promote best practices in its generation with a focus on minimizing re-identification risks across common use cases. Let's move on to the next slide. So for those who are new to synthetic data, here's a brief definition on synthetic data and how it is being generated. Synthetic data can be derived from training a model or algorithm on source data to mimic the statistical properties and patterns of the source data. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So as an emerging technology, synthetic data is not yet widely understood, and thus organizations face several key barriers in adoption. While synthetic data is generally understood to be fictitious and not directly linked to any individual, it's crucial to recognize that it isn't inherently risk-free. The resemblance between synthetic data and its source may potentially lead to information leakage about individuals in the original data set. The key barriers faced by organizations are generally limited of knowledge of potential use case for synthetic data, lack of regulatory clarity regarding risk thresholds for synthetic data, challenges in striking the right balance between data utility and privacy. Our guide is PDPC's proactive effort to address these challenges. We aim to provide organizations with greater clarity in these areas while simultaneously learning alongside with the industry as this technology continues to evolve. Okay, in the next slide, we'll talk about what is in our guide. So in our guide, we've identified several common use case archetypes, highlighting their key benefits and recommending good practices for organizations to consider when generating synthetic data. The first use case archetype focuses on generating training dataset for AI ML models. Organizations developing AI ML models often face challenges in obtaining large volumes of labeled data due to high costs, legal restrictions, proprietary rights issues. Synthetic data offers a possible solution, allowing organizations to augment or diversify their data sets when working with limited data. In this scenario, the synthetic data typically consists of new fictitious data points that don't represent any specific individual in the original data set. As such, these are generally not considered personal data. However, it's important to note that if these new data points skew towards a specific individual or group, there's a potential risk of re-identification. To mitigate this, we recommend that organizations add noise to the synthetic data, reduce the granularity of the new data points. These practices help prevent possible re-identification risks while maintaining the utility of the synthetic data. Moving on to the next slide. The second use case archetype we've identified is the application of synthetic data for data analysis and collaboration. Synthetic data technique proves valuable when replacing sensitive or proprietary source data for sharing purposes. This is because analyzing trends, patterns, and bias is equally useful with synthetic data as it is with real data. In this scenario, finding the right balance between data utility and data protection is crucial. The synthetic data must closely mirror the statistical characteristics and properties of the source data to be useful. However, this similarity also increases the risk of re-identification attacks. To address this challenge, PDPC recommends incorporating data protection measures throughout the synthetic data generation process. These measures can be implemented at various stages. So at the data preparation stage, we could remove outliers from the source data, pseudonymize the data, employ data minimization techniques, generalize granular data. At the synthetic data generation stage, we could add noise before or after or during the generation process. At the post-generation stage, we could implement technical measures, establish contractual process, enforce governance controls measures. These steps help to mitigate any residual re-identification risks. Organizations can refer to PDPC's handbook, which provides useful checklists and detailed guidance for each stage of the synthetic data generation process. Moving on to the next slide. The third archetype use case we've identified is the application of synthetic data for software testing. When generating synthetic data for software development purposes, organizations should prioritize replicating the semantics of the production data. This approach focuses on matching data formats, adhering to minimum and maximum values, replicating other relevant structural elements. By concentrating on these semantic aspects and deliberating avoid the replication of statistical characteristics and properties of the source data, organizations can significantly minimize or even eliminate re-identification risks. This strategy allows developers to work with data that accurately represents the structure and constraints of the production environment while maintaining a very high level of data protection. Next, let's go on to the next slide. This is the handbook on key consideration and best practices in synthetic data generation. As shared earlier, PDPC has included a handbook in the guide. The handbook outlines the key considerations and recommends best practices for organization to reduce re-identification risk when working with synthetic tabular data. We've structured the recommendations into a 5-step approach, which I'll briefly walk you through in the upcoming slides. And this systematic process is designed to help organizations navigate the complexities of synthetic data generation while prioritizing data protection. So let's begin by examining each of these steps in turn, understanding how they contribute to the overall goal of creating useful yet secure synthetic data. So in the next slide, the step 1 is to know your data. Organizations should clearly define the purpose and use case of the synthetic data, understand the source data that the synthetic data is going to mimic. This foundational knowledge helps identify potential risks upfront. Key questions to consider include: could the synthetic data reveal any sensitive trends or insights? Is there a plan to publish the synthetic data publicly? Will any third parties receive the synthetic data? Armed with this knowledge, the management and relevant stakeholder should establish clear objectives for the synthetic data project, set expected benchmarks for data utility, determine an acceptance risk threshold. It is important to note that these benchmarks may need adjustment later to balance any trade-off between data utility and data protection risk measures. Moving on to the next slide is step 2, prepare your data. In preparing data for synthesis, organizations should carefully consider what are the essential insights, including outliers that need to be preserved in the synthetic data to meet business needs. Which data attributes are necessary for generation of synthetic data, and at what level of granularity? By addressing these questions, organizations ensure adherence to data minimization principles throughout the preparation process. In this step, PDPC has included a checklist of recommended good practices for data preparation in our guide. We encourage organizations to refer to this checklist to ensure they are following best practices in data preparation for synthetic data generation. And of course, you can also add on more good practices to the existing checklist, and we encourage you all to do that. Going on to the next step, step 3, generate synthetic data. There are many different methods for synthetic data generation. Organizations must carefully choose the most appropriate method based on their specific business needs and use case, data objectives, and other relevant factors. Once generated, the quality of synthetic data should be assessed across 3 areas: data utility, second is data fidelity, third is the data utility. To aid in this assessment, our guide provides examples of commonly used performance matrix for evaluating data fidelity and utility. As a good practice, organizations should validate the generated synthetic data against data dictionary of the source data. Utilize the post-generation checklist provided in our guide. By following these steps and leveraging the resources provided in our guide, organizations can ensure the quality and appropriateness of their synthetic data for their intended use case. Let's move on to step 4. Step 4 is assess re-identification risk. And this step is happening once the synthetic data has been generated and its utility verified in step 3. Organizations must perform a thorough evaluation and assessment of re-identification risk. The key focus is to ensure that re-identification risk levels fall within the acceptable threshold agreed upon by key stakeholders in step 1. The assessment should be comprehensive, covering the 3 common attacks: singling out attack, linkability attack, inference attack. While there's no universally accepted numerical threshold value for risk level, some organizations may align their risk identification risk threshold with existing standards for assessing de-identified or anonymized data. Organizations may also consider engaging external expertise, such as the synthetic data solution provider or independent risk assessor. These experts can provide an objective evaluation of re-identification risk, thus enhancing the robustness of your risk mitigation strategy. Next, let's go to the step 5. So in step 5, manage residual risk. This is the crucial final step. Organizations should identify all the potential residual risk associated with the synthetic data. The organizations should implement appropriate mitigation controls, such as technical measures, governance controls, and contractual process to safeguard your synthetic data. These controls are designed to lower the residual risk. To assist organizations in this process, PDPC has provided a set of best practices in our guide. These examples offer practical approaches in managing residual risk posed by synthetic data use. We encourage organizations to carefully review and implement these practices, adapting them as necessary to their specific context and risk profile. By following this comprehensive 5-step approach, organizations can maximize the benefits of synthetic data while maintaining a robust data protection standard. Okay, in our last slide, let me summarize. I'm pleased to share that our guide on synthetic data generation was published earlier this year in collaboration with the Agency for Science, Technology and Research A*STAR in Singapore. This comprehensive resource offers real-life case studies to encourage synthetic data adoption among companies. A simplified 5-step process for synthetic data generation, best practices and checklists for each step of the process. We invite you to download the guide using the URL link. I think it's also in the chat group, or you can see on the slide, or the QR code that is provided here. And looking into the future, synthetic data is poised to play an increasingly significant role in our data-driven world. As AI technologies evolve, we anticipate that synthetic data will become more sophisticated, capable of mimicking complex real-world scenarios with accuracy. However, it is also crucial to ensure that the use of synthetic data, particularly for sharing sensitive information, must be approached with caution and careful consideration. And we feel that the key to unlocking the full potential of synthetic data will be the collaboration among various key stakeholders, from data scientists to privacy experts like yourself, to policy makers and business leaders. By working together and following best practices like those outlined in our guide, we can harness the power of synthetic data to drive innovation while maintaining robust data protection standards. And I thank you for your attention. I will pass the time now back to Dr. Khalid. Thank you. And thank you, Minchen.
Thank you very much, Vivian. So I really appreciate Vivian, you taking the time to present to us today, and also your colleagues from A-Star, Ming Tan and Wing
Thank you,
Chong, who are
Minchen.
on the call.
Thank you.
And thank you for producing this guidance, which, like I said, is the first one from a regulator in the world. So it really helps form the thinking around this topic, especially from a regulator perspective. And then for the attendees, again, also thank you for attending. We'll send you links to the recording of the presentation that Vivian gave, and also to a copy of the slides. So you should expect to see that in the next few days. And hopefully you'll be able to join us for other Canon events. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and have a good day or have a good evening wherever you are.